So there's another one. Does it go full Die Another Furious? Well, let's see. Now, the biggest draw for these films is absolutely the plot, so here's the gist. Ethan and the IMF crew team up with Superman to stop 3 simultaneous nuclear attacks. Your basic spy stops bad guy from using bombs story, but with 80% more mustache. Despite how simple that plot sounds, the amount of secret agencies and minor characters, redundant twists, and piles of cold, empty lore that is just stuffed into this film ends up taking Fallout into a kind of silly B-grade kind of area that these films don't usually lean into. And to make matters worse, I think this film has the most expositionary scenes. It's like the movie just stops for a little while so they can talk about the plot. And admittedly, if these scenes didn't exist, I don't know where the plot would go, because it's just wall-to-wall action scenes. And good wall-to-wall, like, these walls are plastered and they're sturdy. It's not my best metaphor. The action of this film is as ballsy and wild as you'd expect from a Mission Impossible film. It's so true that the audience can tell if something is practical, if it's actually happened, because despite the improbability of a lot of the sequences, they're so raw and undeniably practical that you're just drawn into the shenanigans of Ethan Hunt. The practical nature can work against the film at times. It's kind of like, you know, they sacrifice some cool shots to be able to go like, hey, look, that's 100% Tom Cruise flying that helicopter. You want a cool, artsy, good-looking shot? Nah, let's look at Tom's cockpit. In addition to this, anything not practical then kind of feels average and full-on just on-the-nose CG. I guess the upside is Henry Cavill's face isn't CG, so win? And speaking of the mustachio companion, the core group of characters, you know, they do their jobs, but they're very thin, and it's probably mainly caused by the dialogue that is as thin as the napkin it was probably hastily drawn on. If you have time, check out Empire's podcast on this film. There's a heap of stuff from the director, and it doesn't paint this movie in the greatest of light. Cruise's Ethan Hunt is of course back in this film, and Fallout uses his emotional fallibility to its plot advantage. Man, having a good heart in this film, it just doesn't go well for you. And I mean, Ethan doesn't really grow. No characters kind of grow in this film. This film isn't built for character development, clearly. Henry Cavill is once again confusingly English and American, but supposed to be an American, but he's totally English. Like, no American in the CIA has a mustache like that. He is playing 007 in this film with an American accent. He's the brute, charming spy. I say charming, but every line of dialogue he gets is kind of just clumsy and a bit silly, and he is no way the CIA's top operative, despite that being one of the film's many driving points. The IMF team is totally serviceable and provided a few brief moments of comedy and some vague attempts at emotion, but sometimes they also feel like a copy and pasted B team with no real personality. Sadly, the best performance in this film, the standout one, is also one of the most underused ones, and that comes from Vanessa Kirby. A seductive, conniving, multi-layered character in an often 2D world, it's just sad that she's very quickly pushed aside and kind of barely given anything to do. Is it world-breaking if she were a Bond girl? Maybe. Actually, you know what? Screw it. Pair her with Cavill, because he's gonna be Bond at some point, and put them both in the remake of Casino Royale that'll just be titled Bond Consequence. And I bet you're wondering what William Yates thought of the score. I enjoyed it. Like, I remember some brilliant uses of the main sting. It's often drawn out, intense, and fun variants. But Fallout suffers the same kind of fate as Incredibles 2, where it's just over and over use of the really cool main sting until the point you're like, okay, I've heard this enough, and then there's just no unique new motifs for this installment. I have ragged on this film quite a bit in this, but let it be known, I walked out of the cinema and I was satisfied. In the most basic sense, I was satisfied. I mean, I tweeted this. It's a dumb action film with silly, complex stories and wild but fun action set pieces. But that's not Mission Impossible. This franchise is clever but silly, fun but dramatic. It takes risks and pays them off. Fallout, however, sits aside from that, and it just kind of becomes one of those turn off and have fun films. It's the Kingsman the Golden Circle of the Mission Impossible franchise, right down to that silly subtitle. I just hope that the critical praise that Fallout is getting doesn't steer it too hard into a tonal future that will kind of harm one of the few remaining action blockbusters that work. Please Please let me know what you thought of Mission Impossible Fallout. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it just okay? Also, you can hit that subscribe button, and you can also click one of those videos. There's 2 up there. Use your eyes and pick one. It's up to you. I think I'm done.